Let me kick this off. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank you for taking time out of your day to attend today's webinar and choosing to attend the third of our four-part webinar series, Four Vital Solutions for NIST 800-171 Compliance. This webinar series is intended to spotlight our key partners we recommend to further your organization in becoming DFARS and NIST compliant. Today's briefing will focus exclusively on Titus, whose products help our clients classify and unify their data security programs and optimize their existing data loss prevention investments. Titus enables this by establishing a policy-driven foundation for identifying what data you have so you can protect it, automated and user-driven data classification technology, data protection powered by a smart and flexible policy management engine. In addition, Titus's ease of deployment and, more importantly, ease of management reduces the burden on security teams, making their life easier as they manage the organization's security policies, posture, and other technologies. To quickly introduce myself, I'm Mark Porto. I'm the Managing Director at Gulfstream Cybersecurity. Over the years, I've worked closely with both the Department of Defense and the Federal Systems Integrator community to help them achieve full spectrum cyber situational awareness. This utilizes a wide array of tools, often including Titus. I'm sure most of you are aware the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Navy recently announced that they will place even more pressure on DoD contractors to meet higher cybersecurity standards and that they'll hold large contractors responsible for ensuring their subs do the same. The DoD plans to launch red team cyber attacks on industrial partners utilizing nation-state tactics and procedures to breach contractor systems. Navy contractors now have to agree to allow NCIS the ability to remotely deploy agents to monitor and proactively hunt for malicious payload on their contractor systems. Our Gulfstream cybersecurity executive team has engaged with hundreds of defense contractors, very similar to your companies, and fully understands what keeps you guys up at night. While your C-level executives direct you to meet the new DFARS 7012 clause, they challenge you to do so without increasing cost, increasing workloads, disrupting any aspects of the business, or adding any additional staff. Not to mention, you're still tasked with responding to the day-to-day emergencies of your organizations. Our missions at Gulfstream is simply to bring you the most effective, highest rated, least expensive, least complicated solutions to meet the technical controls of NIST. In addition, Gulfstream is happy to assist in the deployment and management of these tools on an ongoing basis with a simple as-needed approach to professional services. To quickly highlight some of our partners at Gulfstream Cyber, we work with Titus, and we're going to learn a lot more about Titus today, but they deliver the document data loss protection through identifying, classifying, and securing data based on its content. We work with Yubico. They are the all-in-one multi-protocol, multi-factor authentication security key. Their technology aside, they're known to be the easiest to deploy, easiest to use, and have the highest user experience rating while offering the highest levels of security. We work closely with Forescout. They are the can't protect what you can't see folks. Forescout provides a level of visibility required to know what's touching your network, classification of those network connected devices, ability to create policies for those devices, and ultimately the management of those devices through automation. FireEye is another company we work with. They provide advanced cyber defense, nation-state grade cyber threat intelligence, pre- and post-breach expertise, and the ability to fully automate cyber operations. Lastly, I'd like to highlight a company called Indige. We work with Indige to support our customers' ICS and SCADA environments. They deliver advanced cyber analytics and defense of industrial control systems. It shouldn't be any surprise that our technology partners and their solutions are each complementary to one another. Our partners are aligned corporately at the engineering and the product development levels. Their tools are designed to work in tandem and ultimately provide full spectrum cyber situational awareness. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we'll send you information specific to Titus. We'll also record this webinar and provide a link to the recording in the follow-up email. Today's Titus guests are Daniel Pratt, Sales Manager of the SMB Clients, and Mal Vong, Senior Titus Systems Engineer. I've asked Daniel and Mal to provide an executive-level overview of Titus and a high-level technical briefing on their products. We plan to have time after the brief for Q&A, but please feel free to type any questions into the questions box and submit them. I'll do my best to make sure that they get addressed. Daniel and Mal, thank you so much for your support. I'm now passing the mic over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. I really appreciate that. And I wanted to, right at the beginning, thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you and the Gulfstream team for working with us to put this together. Again, my name is Dan Pat. I'm the SMB manager for the U.S., so we have coverage across the entire United States. So just to kind of get started off here, I'd like to do a little bit of background on who Titus is, who we are. We were founded in 2005. We've since then set the standard for identification of unstructured data. We've continued to innovate with solutions as new productivity solutions have emerged, including Office 365 and G Suite. We have a global presence in over 120 countries. We're helping to protect data of industry-leading enterprises from obviously government and military, very large financials, and also in the manufacturing sector as well. We have the most powerful policy engine, and we continue to innovate to deliver the right data protection offering for our customers at any phase of their data protection journey. Always start off by talking about the current state of data, which probably most people agree on. And the current state is that data is growing exponentially. Compliance requirements are expanding, becoming more costly. There are, increasing societal implications and expectations around personal data and privacy, in addition to ensuring the security of an organization's IP. The explosion of data and complexity of regulatory governance, combined with changes in how and where we work, has made data protection kind of a moving target out there for most people. So even if you're protected and compliant today, changes in expectations and requirements can come tomorrow, and you need to be ready for those. So what's at stake? There's a lot at stake. Companies struggle with a balance. The need to grow as well as protect data. So most of the customers we talk to is, we talk about this balancing act of protecting data and still needing to be able to secure it. So it's important to realize that with Titus, we don't impede work, we actually enable it. So oftentimes I give my own personal story here about when I started with Titus. I'd never actually classified any data that I created in the past. So at Titus, we obviously use our solution, and every time, it probably took me a good 4 weeks or so, because our classification schema is pretty complex here, with a lot of different levels and layers, which Mal will get into during his part of the presentation. But when I first started out, I was trying to send emails and I was being prompted and reminded to classify them. So after about 4 weeks or so, I would select my classification first and then hit send, and then emails would go no problem. And what that represents is a cultural change. And at Titus, we talk a lot about cultural change with employees, and enabling them to classify their data allows them to be accountable and responsible for the corporate data that they're creating every day. So, people work across platforms, devices, and productivity tools. They need to be able to collaborate and share both internally and externally. So how do you protect data in a cross-platform collaborative environment? Whether you're leveraging investments you've already made or you're incorporating new investments, we can help with a common language to ensure these technologies work together according to your policies to protect your data. So what are the fundamentals of data protection? Pretty straightforward and very fundamental foundational element of what we do, which is know what data you have, know where it is, and know who has access to it. And this concept needs to be founded in your company's policies. You know, most IT professionals and CISOs that we talk to don't really have a good grip on the data that's being created every day at their business. Individual business unit leaders don't really have an idea about what data is being created every day, the sensitivity of it, and that's something that we can really assist with. A lot of organizations talk about that partnership between IT and the business, and I think for a lot of the customers maybe listening right now, a lot of your users will understand, because of the nature of the work that you're in, that they need to be responsible and accountable for the corporate data that's being created. Again, so putting your company's policies at the center of your data protection framework will, help to increase security while mitigating risk. And here's a quick analogy, just getting a little bit more detailed into what we're doing. So we have a big, one of our biggest customers is a shipping company, and they came up with this concept a long time ago. So how do we identify boxes, right? If you're shipping a box, it's just a clear box there. You don't really have an idea about what's in it. So they came up with this method of adding visual markings. So you can see on that box there the visual markings that are for people to be able to read and get a little bit better understanding about how to handle that box. But then on the right side, you can see a barcode there. And the barcode is another form of identification or classification that is machine readable. So human beings can see the markings, get an understanding, but then the barcode allows for the ability to scan that box and understand even more about the contents of it. And it's that concept that we are leveraging for digital files, essentially. So what would the ideal solution be? I mentioned it before. It's having your security policies at the center of your data protection program. Excuse me. Oftentimes we have policies and we speak with customers who have a data classification program, but they lack a mechanism for enforcement. This is why we talk to organizations about enabling security policy. Once you have identified your data, you can understand where the protections need to be. You can identify the data you have so you can apply the right level of security based on your company's policies, regardless of the platform or devices your employees use. And so as you can see there, whether it's server-based applications, cloud, or mobile devices, we put our policy engine in the middle of where your employees are working. And then obviously the other security investments you may already be using can then start to incorporate into what could be an ideal solution. In the Titus solution, so that's where we sit, right in the middle. Whether your employees are using mobile, cloud, or desktop, regardless of those tools, we provide an open and flexible solution that allows you to identify and protect your valuable data on any platform. Again, once data is identified, you can start to leverage downstream technologies like cloud access security, different encryption solutions, DLP technology much more effectively. Titus works where your people and your data work. So Titus leverages data classification, content matching, and validation to help you identify and protect your data. The Titus, we come with the industry's most powerful and flexible policy management platform that is purpose-built to identify, classify, and secure your organization's unstructured data. So we offer, generally speaking, 3 forms of classification, which Mal can talk about a little bit more once he comes in. It's user-driven, suggested, and then fully automated. And we recommend, and most of our customers are using a combination of all three of those. One of the things we're highlighting now is our machine learning capabilities. And machine learning is just it gives our customers the ability to enhance the accuracy and confidence that the right level of protection is being applied to your data, taking into account a user's role, the kind of data they're creating on a regular basis, different trends related to an individual user or users, and then we can increase accuracy of automated classification. And again, we generally recommend that our customers incorporate all three. We have proven methodology, and it's important to understand that organizations need to crawl before they walk, and then crawl and walk before they start to run. So it's typical to start off with very basic, easy classifications for people to understand, and then as people become comfortable with the solution, start to add a little bit more complexity and kind of ease in the solution that way. What we're actually doing is classifying data at the point of creation. So we integrate primarily with the Office suite, for example, and as users are creating data, they're being prompted to classify that data. The classification is based on your organization's policy and takes into account the content and the context, very importantly, of the data that's being created. Once the user selects classification, we will add visual markings automatically to documents and emails and spreadsheets, etc., for human beings to be able to read. So that way, when someone gets an email from our organization, they can see clearly at the top and the bottom of that email the classification, which reflects the sensitivity, and they start to get an idea about how to handle it. So while that's happening, we are also embedding metadata into every single file. So if you think about the box analogy, which I touched on earlier, think about it like that barcode. So visual markings and metadata. So we classify files both inside and out. And the metadata becomes pretty important because of all of our technology partners. So if you look at this slide, a lot of these solutions will probably be familiar to our audience. Any of these solutions we would consider sort of downstream technology that can read our metadata, and then you can apply whatever security policy you have. If you're leveraging any of those solutions, they'll be able to consume our metadata and handle files based on whatever policy you have written there. And finally, I've been talking mostly about data at the point of creation. We also have the functionality or capability to scan out over your legacy data. So if you've got a lot of unstructured data stored up over years and years on file shares or cloud storage or SharePoint, we can actually scan out across there, look for PII automatically or whatever sensitive data you're looking for, and automatically classify and embed metadata into those files as well. So we have capability across both data at the point of creation and data at rest. So that brings me to the end of my quick overview here. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Mal to walk us through a demonstration.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Hope everyone can hear me okay. And I'm about to share my screen here and my deck. Okay, so as Dan was saying, that in any organization, it's basically required when you have structured data, you can then certainly have other solutions or technologies downstream to help and protect that IP, the intellectual property. So what that means is that in any organizations, as we all know, that in terms of the number of users who are responsible for protecting IP, intellectual property, is a smaller group within the IT department compared relatively to the overall end users. But to have a structured content or data in an unstructured environment, really, you need to get everyone involved from the get-go, right? So it is everyone's responsibility to make sure that corporate security policies that follows, to have structured data and be able to basically classify content as the user or the end user, the author or the creator of the content. Okay, so what do we mean by data protection that works? At Titus, basically, we have a solution mainly focused on the end user perspective, right? So these are your author, the creator of the content. So there are two pieces of software that need to be deployed. One is called the admin console, architecturally speaking. The administrator uses the admin console to create a configuration, right? So basically the schema, the classification selections, the policies. So he or she needs to understand what the corporate requirements or use cases are, and then create that in the configuration. From an end user perspective, on the right-hand side of the screen here, the three workstation at the bottom here, just to simulate that, in any environment, large or small, so you could be a couple hundred end users or thousands of these end users. There's a piece of software that needs to deploy to the end user's workstation, whether it's a desktop or a laptop. You can certainly use, it is an MSI file format or .exe, so you can certainly use the infrastructure that you have today within any environment, like SCCM or GPO, to basically push out that client software to your end users. Once the administrator create the config, basically there's a registry key setting that needs to be set from an end user's workstation to basically point to the config file and to consume the config file. So if the configuration ever needs to be changed, the administrator does it once, put it on that either file shares or the web server, and then from the end client's perspective, it will automatically pick up that new modified config. Okay, so protect sensitive information. So as Stan mentioned earlier, it's all about identifying or detecting what's sensitive and what's not, right? So there's two pieces of invaluable information, which is the visual marking for human to consume, and then of course the barcode, also known as the metadata, that can be consumed by downstream solutions. I'll give you more details on both of these invaluable pieces of information and how they can be consumed. Okay, so from a digital world perspective, so you're looking at an Excel document. So what do we mean by visual marking? So we have what we call the overlay icons, right? These are the visual markings that can be consumed by human. And we use or deploy what we call the traffic light coloring scheme. So something is public, it's in green, something that's more sensitive, internal use in yellow, and then something's most restrictive, secret, it's in red. Again, this is just for human to consume. It's something that we can relate to the sensitivity based on the color as well. Now, from as Stan mentioned, there's different ways of configuring the Titus solution. It could be a combination of suggested, automated, or end users classification. Right, so here, it's an example of a use case where the Titus solution has been configured to automatically classify when there's sensitive information. So on this Excel spreadsheet, there's social security number, phone number, and it has been identified right in the middle of what we call the task pane. This spreadsheet contains personally identifiable information, or PII, and it's all configurable. Notice the PII has been highlighted in red, and then please handle accordingly. So this verbiage or wording is really a non-intrusive, but as human, when we see that visual cue or visual wording, it basically helps us to handle the sensitive content more appropriately or more securely. Now notice that the Titus solution has been integrated right into the ribbon. Because SSN content's been identified or detected in this document, the Excel document, it has automatically classified as confidential. Okay? Now when there is, you can configure the Titus to have a pop-up, basically just to verbiage or wording that help the user to understand what's happening. Okay, this is all configurable. There's another method that Dan mentioned, one of the three, is suggested, automated, or user-driven. You can actually configure Titus to force a user who are what we call the intelligent end users, the author, to create the content. So when he or she creates a document or an email, in the case of documents, save the document, Titus can be configured to have this pop-up. Okay, we have what we call also guided classification, meaning that we will guide the users down where he or she need to provide additional structured data. So as you can see on the screen, because it's restricted, it's been as a selection within the classification, a second level called sensitivity, it pops up and guide the users to additionally select a second level classification. Let's say that if the user has created a content that is public, then he or she is done. There is no second level of sensitivity. Again, the configuration, the schema, it's all configurable depending on the use case and the requirements. Now notice on the Word document in the background, the header, you can't really, you sort of see it with restricted in bigger font, red, with a / intellectual property. So that's the visual marking that we inserted from the Titus solution into the header, so that unless I actually, as a reader or as a consumer of this document, the whole content of the document, how would I know the sensitivity of that? By reading that header, I now know that it is restricted, and therefore I should handle it more securely, more appropriately. Okay, this is what we call the tooltip. So this is another way of configuring the Titus right into the ribbon. So this is an email, an Outlook message, and then it's all about end users. So as an end user, if I hover my cursor on top of the selection confidential, there's a tooltip that pops up, confidential, brief description of what it is, how to apply it, the verbiage, the wording, it's all configurable. Okay. There are other user education. It's all about the end users, right? All about a tool for the author, to create to help the organization to create some structured environment in an structured content in an unstructured environment. So there's different way to basically with the tooltips or with explanations of helping users explain what the selection or classification is and when and how to use it. There are many ways to configure that. Okay, so policies alert interface, that is, when an end user inadvertently violates a corporate policy, there will be warning or error messages, policy pops up. There's certainly different way of presenting it, the condensed version on the left-hand side and the verbose version on the right-hand side. Again, this is just to help the end users to prevent, leaking inadvertently those sensitive information. Right. So notice that at the bottom here you have select the classification, return the message. When a user violates a security policy, he or she is prevented from saving the document or from sending the email. There's also what we call the task pane alert. This is the second version of what's integrated right into the task pane. It's a non-intrusive message. It was the one before with the social security number. You saw the highlight of PII information. Here, it just, again, a non-intrusive verbal message is stop, think, and protect. Please consider whether this information is technical data. It's all configurable. Okay. Now the visual marking, as we mentioned earlier, that Dan said that one of the invaluable pieces of information for human to consume, it's the header, restricted / intellectual property, and of course, look at the watermark, right? So this is a insert the username. So this is one use case where it's an inexpensive solution to promote accountability. So if I see my name, Alice Jones, printed in a watermark, and that this document is restricted, I would not want to leave this in the public domain. So certainly with these visual marking and visual cues for human to consume, I would want to treat this, again, content more securely and more appropriately. Okay, we have also the Titus classification to desktop. So any files on your desktop, you can certainly right-click that, and then we'll guide you. For example, here, restricted. This is an ITAR example. The value, the selection, it's all configurable in terms of the program name. So in any regulations where you have to comply to certain regulations, well, interpretation of that regulation is very different from one company to another, or one organization to another. And based on that interpretation, you can certainly configure Titus, however, based on that interpretation. Okay, so in terms of Titus policy, I just want to go through this from an administrator's perspective, this piece of software. There's 3 basic steps. The first step is to identify the schema, the classification selection. The second step is policies. And this is what the most powerful engine that Dan mentioned. I'll give you more example of what we mean by the ECA concept, the event, the condition, and the action. And then the third piece of the third step for the admin console, it's the application settings. Okay, so that we have, out of the box settings. Certainly you can deploy that, or you have specific changes to it, that application settings can be modified. And so I want to give you 3 examples of the powerful engine that we have, or the concept of ECA. So an event would be, as an end user, the intelligent end user, the author, the creator, I create the content, the document, and I hit the save button. Now you could configure the Titus, you have a policy to scan for certain content, or as Dan mentioned, there's different way to detect sensitive information through machine learning, or policy to scan for regular expressions, credit card number using the LUMS algorithm. We have a set of libraries that can be configured to do that. When certain content or conditions are true, for example, save the document when it's got sensitive information, then automatically encrypt it. Now this is a very powerful use case where normally an end user would have to manually encrypt. Well, the steps to manually encrypt might not be straightforward. Also, when do I encrypt? So here's the content is certain, automatically certain sensitive information, it's scanned or detected. The encryption is automatically be applied. Okay, here's another example. When I send an email, I want, if I attach a confidential document to my email, I want my email to be automatically classified as confidential as well. Okay, so if I try to send an email as public with a higher classified attachment like confidential, Titus would have a policy to prevent that, right? So you're basically leaking or sending higher sensitive classified structured content to a lower classified email, and certainly we can prevent that at the desktop. Okay, one last use case here, at Titus, we have a shared non-secure printer that everybody uses in the kitchen, but certainly there's certain sensitive content like HR-related document that I'm printing, and if I'm sending to a printer that it's not secure, certainly I could have a Titus policy to prevent that. So again, it's just to work with the users, the workflow, non-intrusive, and will help the users along the way to help and to protect the IP, the intellectual property, or the sensitive content. Okay, so this is not all-inclusive. It's just a bullet of different policies that have been configured that will help the end user at the desktop, like the recipient policy. If I try to send internal classified email to an external email address, certainly we can certainly prevent that. Okay, so prevent data leaks, ethical wall. I actually have a few slides on certain specific use cases. You have the visual marking policy as how different visual marking can be applied based on different classification, attachment checking, the content validation, the content protection, and we also support cloud storage policies. For example, anything that's classified as restricted or confidential at the very, confidential or higher, we can have a policy to prevent any of that confidential or restricted document being uploaded to a cloud storage. Okay, so some example use cases so you get an idea. Ethical wall, for example, any content that created on the investment side, there's regulations that you can't share it with your brokerage. So basically you configure the Titus policy simply to have where you're coming from, based on your Active Directory groups and memberships. If you're from investment, you create something and you try to send some the content over to someone on the brokerage side, the Titus solution can certainly prevent that. Okay, identify, like there's an example of CUI or exported controlled data, again, to configure in such a way that we will guide the users to help and identify so that none of the regulations or be violated or to be compliant to those regulations. It's all configurable. Okay, here's a promote culture security. It could simply be technical data, yes or no. And if it's yes, then you go down one path to provide additional structured data by providing additional selection or classification. If it's no, then we're done. See, this is one example. Of another example would be the GDPR, the new European regulations. So at Titus, we have, is it personal data? It's yes or no. As simple as that. That's our interpretation of GDPR. Again, your interpretation of GDPR might be different. And if it's the case, certainly you can configure the Titus based on that and your interpretation of certain requirements. Okay, so again, this is a task plane. It's a non-intrusive. Titus can configure, just insert it to remind human, just like a speed bump in a shopping mall, just to slow things down, to stop, think, and protect. At the end of the day, protecting IP, intellectual property, it's everyone's concern, right? Not just the folks in the IT department. Okay, so this is identifying PII or personal data and automatically classify it. This is a screen that you've seen. So you can certainly have a Titus policy to scan for social security number or any sensitive content and then automatically classify based on that scan. Okay, and then pop up a warning or an error message depending on how the policy is configured, again, to just help the end users to understand what he or she is doing. Okay, so here it's protect workers' privacy. Again, there's certain regulations compliant that's meaningful to you. It's all configurable with the Titus solution. Okay, different visual marking, flexible marking. So anything's public, it's blocking green right at the top. Anything that's internal, it's in yellow, printed on the left-hand side, and it's secret, right in your face kind of thing. It's inserted in the watermark. Okay, it's all configurable. Patrol, something that Dan was mentioned earlier. So if I do have, it's called automatic classification. Basically, what that means is that within the user environment, there's certain folder within everyone's desktop. All he or she has to do is drag and drop the document into that specific folder, whether it's patrolled by content validation phrase or the PII, or patrolled by file type, and that will automatically be classified. So anything, for example, that drag and drop into the CV PII, those files will automatically be classified as confidential. Okay. So the patrol example, you can certainly configure it to insert the overlay icon. So again, this is the circle T Titus in blue. It's all configurable instead of using that traffic light coloring scheme. Everything in terms of even the color, it's configurable. Okay, so eliminate. Just want to touch on what Dan mentioned in terms of legacy or existing data. So the desktop solution, it's a tool that end users can use for the content that they create today and moving forward. But in any organization, obviously there's existing content or documents or files on the network share, perhaps it's in the cloud. How do we provide a baseline structured data, or how do we provide a baseline classification? So the Titus solution for that is to use Eliminate. So what exactly is Eliminate? Or it's an administrator tool that can be configured to scan anything in terms of file shares within the organization's infrastructure or in cloud storage for specific file properties like access control, file attribute, the own, the size, the date, anything and everything's configurable, and then even scan or perform the content validation for specific content or keywords, capture the classification, whether there is existing classification, and then certain action can be applied, right? So for example, eliminates, scan the folder and discover certain PCI or PII content in the file, well, automatically set the classification to confidential. Or suggest a classification with a reason, put that into the file, embed that in the content, automatically trigger the Microsoft Right Management Service, RMS. For example, do not print, RMS be applied for when eliminate scans and then discover certain sensitive content. Or it could, if you do have, or in a cloud repository, you can certainly configure eliminate to insert the cloud metadata, like the box metadata, SharePoint, and then certain other action for deletions or management files. You can copy, delete, move files, or rename files, depending on your use case or your requirements. Okay, so in terms of ecosystem, you've seen the slides presented by Dan. The whole thing is a busy slide, but nonetheless, the Titus Circle T in the center. The key here is to have structured data, right? Involve your end users, the intelligent end user, the author, the creator of the content, or deploy some, machine learning algorithms, suggest the classification, ultimately allow the end user to decide what's the appropriate classification, any of the combination or permutation. Once you have structured data, though, the key here is then downstream solution, whether it's a DLP, a data prevention, an archiving solution, reporting, so any event that the user makes, like the downgrade, the upgrade, an event is generated, downstream solution then can data mine that event and then generate meaningful reports. So this is key, is to have structured data, having that barcode metadata, okay? More specifically, just wanna show you, I talked about a lot about the visual marking for human. Well, what about that barcode, or how does that map to the metadata within the digital content? So in an email, it's in the X header. The X header is never encrypted because it's got the routing information, it's got all kind of information, it's there, it's non-intrusive, but if you know what you're looking for, like a gateway, in the internet headers on the screen here, the second line where you have classification equals Titus internal, so that's the attribute value pair. Configure your gateway to scan for the attribute classification. The value then is Titus internal, then take additional action. If it's public, then you do not need to protect that. If it's restricted, then do something else. Okay, so that metadata is within the email internet headers, or known as the X header. Okay, in terms of Microsoft Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, it is within the custom properties of the document. It is embedded in the document. It travels the document. It parts the document. So here you have the second property called Titus Corp. Sorry, the third one, Titus Corp classification. So that is obviously configurable. Titus Corp is us. Classification is the field name, and then the value is public. So this is where the later slide will show how we complement the DLP by configuring the DLP to scan for the metadata. In this example, Titus Corp classification, and whatever the value is, if it's public, then let it go, allow it to be copied to a USB drive, for example. If the value is restricted, then have a DLP, data loss prevention policy, to prevent that restricted content being copied to the USB drive, right? So that's the metadata. Right? In Adobe PDF, Adobe has a location called the keywords. Again, we have that attribute value pair, classification equals confidential, so you can certainly configure the downstream to consume that metadata and trigger additional native policies. Okay, so for example, this is how the Titus solution being the front end, a tool for the end users to help the organization to put some structure in an unstructured environment by classifying it. So in this example, you could have a DLP that scanned for Chicago. Well, Chicago has no context, right? So well, it's Project Chicago, which is restricted and sensitive, or a trip to Chicago, which is public, personal, or non-sensitive. But with the Titus solution, when you have the classification, you now have an extra data point that you can configure your downstream solution to consume, not only scan for the keyword Chicago, but now scan for the metadata or the structured data, the classification, and then trigger additional policies. Right? So in this example, anything you scan, extra data point, anything that's public, let it go out in the cloud, let it, allow it to be copied to a USB or a thumb drive, anything that is internal or secret, then have that sensitive content blocked at the gateway, at the DLP. Okay, so in terms of retention, again, the user compose the content, whether it's send, save, or print. They're forced to identify, to classify. Now you have structured data, and then with the metadata, you can now have an archiving solution to make decision based on that metadata or on that structured data. Okay, so anything you can certainly have a process to consume that metadata, and then anything that older than a year or 2 years, we move it to a different folder, delete it. Anything that it's depending on the structure, the classification, you might want to keep that. Okay, just an example. Okay, so that comes to the conclusion of my presentation. I'd like to turn this over to Mark for general Q&A.
Awesome. Mao and Daniel, thank you so much. I have two questions that I'd like to ask. The first one, if you could, what are some of the ways that you would like to guide your prospects to determine if Titus is the right fit for their organization? Do you guys engage in traditionally in proof of concepts, or do you do things through online demos? What is the best way for someone to learn more about you, more specific to their environment and their requirements?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. This is Dan. So that's a great question. Traditionally, we would like to have a qualification discussion with a customer to understand their unique requirements and their needs. Understand a little bit about what they're currently doing with in their security program, and from there we can build a customized demonstration where we can come back and take an hour or so and walk through those specific use cases and show how Titus can address those. From there, we will generally move on to a proof of concept, where we'll essentially trial out Titus in a customer's environment or lab to prove out whether or not we can address the requirements. We offer policy workshops where we can get involved and take those specific use cases and work through policies that we've got a lot of experience around building policies with over the years and all the customers that we've got. So we bring a wealth of knowledge to that as well. And then something else we offer is kind of like we could do a roadmap discussion and talk about what's in store for Titus and our customers down the road.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. And, to the participants on the line, I would truly invite you to engaging with myself or my team at Gulfstream and allowing us to help you facilitate those discussions with the team at Titus. Gulfstream and Titus work close together in support of the defense, contractor community, and we would certainly love to have those discussions with you. Another question I have, we've been working together some time, but what do you think the reasons are that so many companies are choosing Titus?
Okay, I'll take that. It's Mao. So from I've worked in this space for some time. We hear about breaches and what's being hacked and sensitive content. So there's a saying that it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. So it really comes down to this thing, right? It comes down to having structured data. So you're gonna have to protect or take actions to protect more what's sensitive, and then what's not so sensitive. So in other words, once you have structured data, you can then apply that little busy slide that we have with Titus in the center, and however you identify structured data, you can now, in any organization, you can now have solution and technologies now to protect what's more sensitive and what's not.
Excellent. I appreciate it. To the participants, does anybody have any questions they would like to send over via the chat while we have the experts on the line? Well, that said, I appreciate your time, Daniel, and Mao. It is great hearing from you guys as always. I will send out some documentation to the folks who chose to spend an hour with us today, and would like to always extend the invitation to reach out and ask any questions privately via email or phone call. So thank you all, and I look forward to connecting with you guys soon.
Thank you all.